Welcome back. We're discussing Bosnia's decline and how to prevent the country from falling apart. Joining us today is Mohamed Shakir Bey, Bosnia's former foreign minister and twice the ambassador to the UN. He's in the studio with me. In Sarajevo is Kurt Basina, a senior associate with the Democratization Policy Council, a global non-profit that works to promote accountability in democracies. Also in Sarajevo is Marko Prelec, Balkans project director for the International Crisis Group. As we get back to our discussion, let me get to Marko Prelec in Sarajevo and ask, to what extent do you, knowing the people there, has there been like a cynicism and fatigue wearing in? Ambassador Shakir Bey says that that people do get on the ground level, but to what degree is there a cynicism or fatigue that the country can run itself?
Well, there's enormous cynicism with politicians in Bosnia. Ambassador Shakir Bey is quite right. Relations between ordinary people are quite good. Part of that is because most people live in communities mostly with people of their own ethnicity, but even when that's not the case, relations are surprisingly good even in places where terrible war crimes took place. But very few Bosnians expect much from their politicians, and the problem is especially acute here in Sarajevo, which is not only the capital of the country, but also capital of the larger of the two entities. There's really a sense that people have virtually no say over how they're governed, and that's unfortunate.
Ambassador, we had a question that came from a regular viewer, Lilia Patterson, who wrote into our Facebook page and says, what happened with the EU suggestion of declaring Bosnia a Muslim country? And Vladimir Putin's reply to start World War III against Europe if it happened?
Well, first of all, there was an idea by many progressive European parliamentarians to bring Bosnia into EU membership even during the war as a way of actually suffocating the causes for the war. Because Bosnia does not see its future as a Muslim country, it sees its future as a part of the European Atlantic family with a Muslim majority, plural or otherwise. So in this case, actually, we do believe that the Euro-Atlantic family has in many ways betrayed us. We suffered a terrible consequence, not fighting for Muslims, but fighting to preserve a multicultural, multi-ethnic state. And in the end, we got painted as Muslims. We even had comments by such well-known personalities as Richard Holbrooke, who said, well, if we didn't have the Dayton Agreement, the September 11th attacks would have come from Bosnia instead of Afghanistan. That is a slur upon Bosnia. And it is much more appropriate to speak about Bosnia, how do we preserve it as a European multi-ethnic state rather than thinking of it as somehow being separate from the rest of that continent. We just happen to be a large number of us, majority of us probably, Muslims.
Kurt Basina, what lessons do you think have been learned by the international community from what happened in the former Yugoslavia? I mean, apart from that late intervention, what do you think has been learned watching what's happened to Bosnia, for example?
I'm not sure very much has been learned at all, and I think that's part of the problem. I think what we've actually done is replicated some of the mistakes subsequent to Bosnia, and Bosnia looks like a relative success story considering the subsequent mistakes in Kosovo, East Timor, Afghanistan, Iraq. But I'm not sure that anything has been learned. I think that's part of the problem that we're still experiencing here. I don't think there's a recognition of how the international community and Bosnia, such as is Dayton, Bosnia, got to be stalled and dysfunctional and not being able to propel itself toward the Euro-Atlantic family that Ambassador Shakir Bey just mentioned. I wish more had been learned, but I'm not sure it's sunk in.
Well, Marko Prelec, could I put a question that came in from another regular viewer, Moin Rauf, who wrote in on Facebook saying, when will NATO capture General Ratko Mladic and other Serb war criminals? And I wonder, in your opinion, how important it is for a secure future for example, Radovan Karadzic to be seen to be paying the price for his actions and for General Mladic to also be up in front of the tribunal as well?
It's enormously important, Riz, and it's a real sign of how far Bosnia has gone. Sometimes you hear people saying, the country's moving backwards, and people have been saying this for many years. But you have to remember that, for years after the war, Radovan Karadzic was moving around quite openly, having enormous influence over Bosnian Serb affairs. Now he's in The Hague awaiting trial. One of his colleagues in the Bosnian Serb leadership is just now finishing her sentence in Sweden, having been convicted of serious crimes in The Hague. And it's enormously important for this process to continue with, in some ways, the most serious of all the alleged war criminals, Ratko Mladic. There are signs that we're moving close to a situation in which he can be arrested and extradited. And I think this is the moment when we need to keep the pressure on Serbia to cooperate fully with The Hague.
Ambassador, a question from our live station chat room where people are online talking about this now. And Noor in Canada says, what do the Bosnian people want to help them normalize their country? What's the view on the street?
We've heard the term state building or country building when we talk of Bosnia. Actually, I think that's inaccurate. First of all, remember that Bosnia-Herzegovina did have a government, of which I was a foreign minister, and that government actually did defend the country, did manage to save most of the people in that country from genocide. And that was a rather complex process. We started out with no army, very few resources, and the country was besieged. And at the end of the war, we decided, in fact, to share power with the so-called Bosnian Serb leadership and others to, in fact, help reintegrate the country. So it's not about do we know how to build a country. It's about the will necessary to reintegrate the country and reverse the consequences of ethnic cleansing. In fact, this is not just a complaint about injustice and about all the betrayals I think we have seen in terms of Ratko Mladic and others who have not been arrested. And trust me, they could have been arrested a long time ago. There just was not either a will, and in fact, in many instances, there's evidence that there were deals made on the side they would not be arrested. The real issue is that if you have a country that in one part of it is defined solely by ethnic definition, and therefore the other side is as well, and in one side of the country only a Serb can be a member of the presidency, you are in effect building, as I think Kurt has mentioned, an oligarchy that is not the notion of a modern state. So in fact, Dayton has taken us backwards. Yes, there has been enormous economic assistance. Absolutely, it's great that there is no war. But in fact, the structure that Dayton brought in is regressive. And it is the lack of will in Washington, and to some extent in Europe, to say, okay, Dayton has served its purpose, but now let's go back. And in fact, not only do some things that are necessary from the start in Bosnia, but also reverse some of the consequences of the compromises that were made during the Dayton Agreement.
Now, Richard Holbrooke says it didn't happen, but I gather you say that Radovan Karadzic was offered a chance to avoid appearing in the courts if he was to step down.
Yes. I have been told that by several witnesses. The New York Times has in fact confirmed that as well, as has the study group headed by Professor Charles Grau. So I don't even care to get into that engagement anymore. I stand behind my allegation. And there was a deal made, and there were worse deals made, including the one that betrayed Srebrenica. Srebrenica was supposed to be a UN protected zone, a NATO protected zone. The people there were largely disarmed, at least of their heavy weapons. When the attack came, in fact, those people were left to their own wit, and 8,000 people were murdered.
Kurt Basina, looking at as the country moves ahead, or is trying to remain structured together, there have been some bright spots in the reconstruction efforts. The self-governing Brčko district in the northeast, for example, seems to be far better integrated than other areas. What are the factors that allow a place like Brčko to be successful in terms of integration, and yet other areas to degenerate?
Well, Brčko was different in a lot of ways. You could look at it as a protectorate within a protectorate. I mean, there was heavy American engagement investment. There was a commitment to multi-ethnicity. It's the only place you really have a multi-ethnic police force in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example. It's not in either of the two entities that were established by Dayton. It was sort of, Brčko was a leftover from Dayton because there couldn't be agreement. So it was there was an arbitration panel that decided it wouldn't be part of either entity. So I think that Brčko shows what can be done on the local level with sufficient resources and being protected from this sort of ethnocracy. And I think that gives us an idea of what is possible in Bosnia, which was one of the first towns to be ethnically cleansed in 1992. It was a very ugly place during the war. So I think that does speak to the fact that Bosnians can get on with each other, given the proper context.
Let me actually ask Marko Prelec here. There are people who are saying that perhaps the only solution might be to split up Bosnia. I mean, it's sort of almost like a reflection of what happened with the former Yugoslavia. Is there any chance of that happening? Is there any chance of that even succeeding?
I think the chances are very, very slim. It's actually not really in anyone's interest, not even the Serbs. Sometimes you hear talk, some of it coming from Banja Luka, the capital of the Serb Republic, about declaring a referendum for independence or something like this. The Serb leaders ought to know that the most likely result of that would be leaving them in a position akin to that of Nagorno-Karabakh or Abkhazia or South Ossetia, not recognized by anyone. Or possibly even worse, something like Northern Cyprus, where in 20 years they could be negotiating their way back into Bosnia on worse terms than when they left.
I have to stop you there only because we ran out of time.
The chances are very, very slim.
Well, thank you, sir, for that, and I thank you all for taking part in this. Unfortunately, we're out of time in our debate. Thank you, our viewers, for being with us as well. All next week, we'll be taking the show to New York, where we'll look at some of the most pressing political, military, and humanitarian issues facing world leaders who gather for the annual UN General Assembly meetings. We'll kick off with the new Secretary General of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, and ask him about the alliance's role in Afghanistan. Join us for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.